Hello and welcome to this ongoing guide into the Moog Modular emulation by Arturia. And today we're talking about filtering. So the basic sound that we're going to start with today is this kind of, it's a nice complex sound, there's lots of interest to it, but it's a bit nasty. Okay, and that's built up with, you can see we've linked a triangle wave, a sawtooth wave with a pulse wave, and they're linked together here, and they're just going straight to the output. Let's get rid of this cable, don't need that one. Going straight to the output, as simple as you like. Now we're going to introduce a filter. So instead of going straight from the amplifier to the VCA, we're going to instead head up into this voltage controlled low pass filter up here. Oops, let's do that again. And we're going to come out of the filter to the VCA. So we've introduced one new module in our chain. And we've immediately got a different sound. We've lost that really harsh sound that we had, and it's now softer. Why is that? Because the frequency is set to 3.5K, as you can see, and that means that everything over 3.5K is being truncated in some way, and we can see that with our spectrum analyzer down here. Now notice I didn't say chopped. The Moog and most analog instruments don't do things black and white, they're not digital, and this is an emulation of an analog piece of equipment, and so even though the frequency is set to 3,500 Hertz, you can see that there's plenty going on above. What's happening is that there's an attenuation, a dropping off, a cutting away at that range. Let's change this frequency value and see what happens. Okay, and if we reduce it to 0, we get no sound because all frequencies are being attenuated. And finally, there. That's what analog instruments do. They always leave you a tiny little bit of something behind. Nothing is ever completely gone. And there it is coming back. We're at 360 Hertz now. So 360 Hertz is being basically left alone, and then stuff above it is being cut away. And there's the tone coming back. So that's great. Now we've got a way of shaping our tone. And it immediately sounds nicer. In addition to being able to control, and this is just to describe the low pass nature, things below that frequency cutoff are being let through, they're being allowed to pass through, and it's only stuff above that's being chopped away. So a low pass is good news for low frequency and bad news for high frequency. In addition to our cutoff value, we also have this resonance knob, and resonance basically gives you a point in the frequency range where the filter will accentuate a set of tones. You'll get a little bump in the frequency range. So here's our note. There's the spike. Gets steeper and steeper and steeper. So we're really pumping out that 4.5K. It's actually, the spike is slightly below. It's at 3.2. So we max out. That's quite unpleasant. I'll let it go, but it was at 3.36. We don't want to listen to that for long, do we? If we bring the frequency range down to 700, and and then do the same kind of thing. There's the peak, and this time it's at 475. So the resonance Q, the resonance intensity doesn't have a one-for-one equivalence to the absolute cutoff range, but it will always, regardless of what value you set, it'll always single out, there you go, an overtone to accentuate. And as we go through the frequency range, you'll hear, when the resonance is turned up, a much sharper, more intense accentuation of a single frequency. And there you can see it sweeping through the frequency range, and if I come to rest at any given place, then the analyzer will settle down to really hone in on that frequency. So between frequency and resonance, you get a lot of flexibility in shaping your sound, and you can get some really lovely sounds. Now that's all very well and good, but we don't want static filtered sounds. We want to have them change over time. That's when they get really interesting. So the way that we do that is we start off with a sound like reasonably interesting, and then we apply a time variable effect to that filter. And the way that we're going to do that is with an envelope. So here we have envelope 1. And an envelope, I don't want to get too simplistic because we're talking about the Moog here, not the fundamentals of sound design, but you've got attack, decay, release and sustain. Or ADSR, attack, decay, sustain and release typically, but you can see on the Moog release and sustain are the other way around. So attack is how long it takes to get to the high point of the envelope. Decay is it's settling back down into the sustain period where it will carry on at a fixed level, and then release is what happens when you let go of the key. So it's very typical stuff. You see this absolutely everywhere. And if we plug this envelope into any one of these 3 modulation sources, it doesn't matter which one, they all do the same thing. Drop it in here. And now, as we saw on the previous tutorial, variable inputs like this with this little orange dot above mean that we can click on the metal bit of the jack and decide how much change we want the envelope to apply to the filter effect. So let's have it a decent chunk. And now, when we press a key, I'll take it out just to start with. Okay, so that's the sound on its own. Drop this in. And you can see on the spectrum analyzer, the sound starts off sharp, and then those high frequencies are dropped away, cut away, and then we end up with a low sound. What's happening here is that this envelope is hitting very, very fast because there's no attack, so it's happening instantly, and then we've got a decay of 3 seconds. So over the course of 3 seconds, this shape is applied to the filter that it's being fed into via the modulation source, and it starts out with a very high frequency cutoff and then pulls away over the course of 3 seconds and settles down to nothing. The sustain is at 0, so once it's done, it's not applying any change to the sound, and we end up with what we would have had we applied no modulation at all. So that's what we're going to end up with, and we're going to get there over the course of 3 seconds. It starts out, and it's like what we've basically done is we've started with the knob about there because we're applying, what was that, 32% of modulation to it. That's what's happening. Over 3 seconds, 1, 2, 3. Do that via the envelope. Okay. So now with the mix of filters and envelopes, we've got some really quite nice effects being applied. And now we sound like a Moog. This is what analog keyboards are all about. Okay, but that's just a low pass filter. We can have other types of filters, and we can change those by clicking on the name up here. So now we've got a high pass filter, which is going to operate the other way round. And you can see now we're only letting the high frequencies through. So we're starting out very, very high indeed, and then pulling it back so that not quite all of the frequency gets through, but the low stuff is being thrown away. And that's what we're settling down at, which is as if we'd have taken this away, and we get that. When we drop it in, we get this really, really high sound. The reason it's still coming from a high frequency down to the point where we settle is because this modulation is a positive value, but it doesn't have to be. We click on the metal ring and make it negative. Now what are we going to get? Now we start off with low stuff and we come up to the point where we're going to finish off. Make this as steep as we can and make the decay a bit longer, 5 seconds ish. That's all those low frequencies being cut away over the course of 5 seconds. And then we finish off with the sound that we would have had we not plugged it in the first place. That thing, quite nasty. So high pass filters give you a really brittle kind of nasty sound. Low pass filters are the more common of the two. We can have a multi-mode filter, which allows us lots of different types of effect. So there's a low pass. It's currently set to a low pass filter. And again, let's put our envelope back in. Set this positive. Get our low pass traditional kind of sound. Switch it to a band pass. So what's going to happen now is it's going to choose a range of frequencies to let through and throw everything away on either side. See it? Make that really intense. And then it settles down at whatever our frequency knob is here. Turn the frequency up, goes up, and there we go. And here's our resonance, where we choose how intense the spike is. So there's no spike there, you see. And then we bring the spike in and it accentuates a particular frequency. A notch filter is the opposite. It's going to cut away some frequencies and leave everything on the opposite side so that we can really see it clearly on the spectrum analyzer. I've just turned to a straightforward square wave. So there's the notch being cut away. Okay. Different form of high pass. There's the low frequencies being allowed through and then increasingly cut away. And you can see that they fade, they don't disappear completely. That's no envelope being applied, that's just the thing itself. But when we turn the knob, it takes a while to get there, so you get a very organic kind of sound. One point to know about the multimode filter. I've switched back to low pass now. Is that you have a modulation source to the resonance. You don't have this on the standard low pass filter, but you do on the multi-mode. So now we can take this envelope off. If we apply it to the resonance instead, see the resonance starting out very intense and then tailing away. Here it comes, and then it settles down to the point where, come on down, there we go. So you can have variable effects being applied to the resonance. There is one other filter in here, which is the coupler, which allows you to apply a variable modulation effect to the bandwidth, to the band pass or band reject. You see this knob here, the band reject or band pass. I don't use it very often, so I'm not going to describe it in great detail. You can also select other types of filters as well. Quickly go through those. So the Bode shifter, this isn't something I use a great deal, but basically it shifts the entire sound up or down in frequency, or whatever's fed into it. It applies a linear change of frequency, and this can be quite easily confused with pitch shifting. It's not the same. When you shift the pitch of something, you change all of the ratios of all of the sounds at the same time. So if you move from C to C sharp, all of the harmonics of that note are also being basically expanded, so you get a pure C sharp. When you use a linear frequency shift, all of the frequencies are being moved, so your fundamental might move from a C to a C sharp, but all of the overtones that would otherwise have been all in multiples of the original harmonic are not consistent anymore, and you start getting dissonance. So the Bode shifter is used for it can generate quite unpleasant or quite metallic or harsh, unusual sounds. Let's show you an example of one. Not something I use very much, but it's there if you want to have a bit of a play with it. Again, with the Formant filter, so this allows you to try to emulate vowel sounds. Basically picks out it gives you 4 individual 1, 2, 3, 4 filters that you can apply to try to make vowel sounds. It's, again, not something I'm a big fan of, but it is there. Just remember that you can click on either of these 2 things to get to all these different filter settings, and I spend 99% of my time using either the Multimode low pass or the VC low pass itself. That's where my heart lies with filtering. Now, there are many more different kinds of effects that you can apply to change a filtered sound, and in the next video we'll see what happens when we start applying the low frequency oscillator, which is another type of variable effect to the filter bank, and we can start getting some really great sounds. Hope you'll join me then. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next time.